Water, the source of life. We drink it, cook with it, bathe in it. We just turn on a tap and there it is. But not so long ago, taking the waters was considered to be the heart of a healthy lifestyle and the height of fashion for polite society. This helped transform a humble village into a thriving spa town. From the 1480s onwards, the small Warwickshire village of Leamington Priors was notable for one thing: a natural spring of saline mineral water, situated just outside the parish church. The spring had a reputation for healing properties. By the late 18th century, when war in Europe made foreign travel difficult, English towns such as Bath, Cheltenham and Tunbridge Wells were becoming popular spa resorts. People travelled from far afield to experience what became known as taking the waters.
The established ones nearby would say Cheltenham and Bath. Both were very, very popular places, but they were having their difficulties. I mean, Bath was very congested, it was very expensive. Cheltenham, interestingly enough, kept running out of spa water.
Bath and Tunbridge Wells had been well established as a place for taking the waters. So other people began to have the idea, I think, and when they saw that foreign travel was no longer available, they put their best commercial foot forwards.
The reason the original well wasn't used commercially early on was because it was on public land, which was in effect in the ownership of the lord of the manor, who was the Earl of Aylesford. He lived many miles away near Meriden at Packington Hall, but he still had tremendous influence on what went on in Leamington, and he wouldn't allow it to be used commercially.
Everything changed in 1784. William Abbots, the landlord of the Dog Inn, and Benjamin Satchwell, the village postmaster, discovered a second natural spring on land Abbots owned south of the River Lem, in what is now Bath Street.
I'm not sure that they were actually looking for a well or a spring, but they found a pool of water and tasted it, and it was salty. And they then, over the next few months, decided to dig a well and exploit it, and the first baths were built.
Abbott's Saline Baths opened in 1786. It was a modest premises, offering just one hot and one cold bath, in a building which was little more than a shack. But Leamington's spa industry was born.
Matthew Wise, one of the local landowners, built a bath on the corner of what was then London Road or the Turnpike and Bath Street.
Wise's baths were larger and more luxurious than those of Abbott's, comprising 13 separate baths fitted with Dutch tiles and Derbyshire marble. That was just the start. Robbins Baths, situated on the south bank of the River Lem, opened in 1806, and Reed's Baths, just across the road from Wise's, shortly afterwards.
Once they'd started, yes, there was a lot of competition. In fact, that was a good thing, because it meant that the owners had to keep on their toes in terms of providing the services for the people coming down. The wells were very close together. There were only like 10 minutes between them all, so the competition was quite fierce.
The growth of Leamington was quite slow, even after the exploitation of the first bath, but beyond that it started to develop much more quickly.
Leamington gradually developed, first of all, from the early bathhouses, of which there were a lot down in Bath Street. Then the entrepreneurs thought, there's money to be made here. They owned all the land to the north of the river.
The major landowners were Will's family, the Great Heeds and the Wise family. The Wise family lived in the south. Great Heed acquired lands to the west, and the Wills family had a lot of land all over the east and towards the south and north, so they were probably the biggest landowners. Great Heed, Bertie, he was probably the most interesting of them all. He lived at Guy's Cliff, which is some distance from Leamington. He had plantations in the West Indies.
His position, though, in the early 1800s is actually quite difficult financially. He's a man who has quite a grand lifestyle. He's got aristocratic connections. But in the course of the Napoleonic Wars, which at that point had been raging for some years, the transatlantic trade, which is crucial to his ability to export the sugar from his plantation to the sales points in Britain and Europe, is compromised.
Keen to have a slice of the growing Spa market for himself, Greyheed made concerted efforts to find water on his land and enlisted the help of several of his wealthy friends. Plans were drawn up for a much larger and grander pump rooms and baths than those previously built in Leamington. The architect C.S. Smith was appointed to design and build the new facility, and works began in 1813. It featured a distinctive frontage with a colonnade of pillars in the Doric style and a large grand pump room.
It was 100 feet long, it was around 30 feet high. There were wings at either end, and then at the back of the building there were the baths themselves. So there were 17 hot water baths and 3 cold.
They weren't constrained by any original designs, roads or whatever. And they were able to build quite a magnificent pump room buildings. Plus, it had a large space next to it, which were developed as gardens.
One of the benefits of Leamington is that there was what's usually described as an endless supply of spa water. But of course the challenge was to draw it from the bottom of the well, 30-odd feet deep, up to the level of the ground where the patrons could start and drink it. The way that they got around this was the introduction of a 2-horsepower steam engine. This was fabulously cutting edge for the town, drawing on the expertise, relatively local, which had been developed in Birmingham. So it's the famous Bolton and Watt manufacturers who built it.
The new pump room and baths, as it was initially known, opened in 1814 and was an immediate success. The venue placed Leamington on a par with the most fashionable resorts in the land and was renamed Royal Baths and Pump Rooms in 1815. Spa water was credited with curing all kinds of conditions, from dyspepsia to scrofula, gout and rheumatism.
As a warm bath, the waters of Leamington, artificially heated, are highly serviceable, particularly in stiffness of the tendons and rigidity of the joints, effects of preceding inflammation from the attacks of gout and rheumatism. The combined use of the water bath externally and the internal exhibition of the waters has been found an almost sovereign remedy for all diseases of the skin. Many people have come to Leamington in a condition so miserable as to have been objects of pity to all around them, and returned so free from all symptoms and appearance of disease as almost to stagger credulity in the relation of their former sufferings.
An early visitor was James Bissett, who brought his wife and daughters from Birmingham to take the waters in 1811. He was so taken with Leamington that he moved there permanently in 1812. He became a passionate promoter of the town, publishing a series of guides, opening a museum, minting souvenir coins, and even composing poetry in its honour.
At early dawn prepare to rise, and if your health you really prize, to drink the water's quick repair, and take a walk to breathe the air. High through the fields or promenade, round pump room, grand or colonnade. A second glass now take, what then? Why, take a pleasant walk again. The water's exercise and air will brace your nerves, your health repair. Then to your breakfast haste away, with what keen appetite you may.
Leamington was blessed, but not until the 1820s, with 2 good medical men, Mr. Chambers, who was well known in London and well known amongst aristocratic circles, and of course his partner Henry Jeffson, who was here from about 1823 onwards, but whose fame as a physician was very rapidly established, so that by the end of the 1820s, people were coming to him from all over the country, specifically coming to Leamington to consult Henry Jeffson.
Dr. Jeffson prescribed a strict regime of healthy eating and exercise, taking the Leamington waters twice a day and hot or cold baths several times a week.
People came to take the waters from quite a wide area, Some of the quite early ones were people like the Duke and Duchess of Bedford and the Duke and Duchess of Gordon, and their presence in the town is now recognised by streets named after them.
Now, the wonderful thing about the Duchess of Gordon was she was William Pitt's political hostess. She was the arch political rival of Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, of whom most people have heard. But the other thing that made society spit was the fact that she had 5 daughters, and she married no fewer of them than 3 to dukes.
Jefferson's reputation for treating the rich and famous cemented the town's standing and was also very lucrative for the doctor himself. By the mid-1830s, he was earning the equivalent of £1 million per year, living and working in a fine mansion in the centre of town. The growing town needed to accommodate many visitors, so the demand for hotel rooms began to grow. In 1819, John Williams and his wife Sarah, who had formerly been butler and housekeeper to the Greatheed family, opened a grand new hotel at the heart of the new town. Like the pump rooms, it was designed by C.S. Smith and was bigger and better than all that had preceded it.
This was the largest hotel in Europe when it opened, with 100 bedrooms, only 1 bathroom. The Prince Regent was staying at Warwick Castle shortly after it opened. He came over in his carriage and he was graciously pleased to enable them to call it the Regent Hotel, which obviously gave it much, much greater prominence and attracted more people.
As the population swelled, the demand for leisure facilities increased.
When you came to Leamington, you would probably take the waters in the morning, half a pint, walk round those pump room gardens for 20 minutes, and then you go back and you'd take another half pint. And then you'd go home for breakfast, but you'd have the rest of the day. Now, if you were a patient of Henry Jefferson, you couldn't fill the rest of the day by gluttony. He put you on a very strict diet, and also he insisted that you walked everywhere. So you did need some entertainment. You had what the forerunner of the Jefferson Gardens were, places to promenade, and you also have to remember that when you came to take the waters, it wasn't just taking the waters. You came to be seen and to see other members of society. And doubtless you were also partly something to do with the marriage market as well.
The town itself could develop a variety of interests for people. So they'd had ballrooms, they'd have libraries, they'd have picture shows, they'd have famous authors visiting, this kind of thing. So that was all geared towards providing entertainment for the wealthier classes.
Leamington's first assembly rooms were opened in the new town in 1812, and the rival lower assembly rooms, also known as the Parthenon, opened in Bath Street in 1821, run by the famous London actor and impresario Robert Ellis.
In the assembly rooms, you could read the papers. There were evening concerts laid on, balls laid on, card evenings laid on. There was also a lending library in Leamington, so you could borrow your books. And for an idea of what people did, read Jane Austen's books about life in Bath at that time. Very similar.
The grand new facilities of Leamington Priors not only needed customers, they also needed labourers to build them and staff to run them.
Unfortunately, the conditions for the poorer people were appalling. And it was quite apparent in one particular area, which was, of course, housing. They had to be accommodated, but the builders weren't interested in providing particularly expensive accommodation for them. So what happened was they built a series of what they call courts at the back of the beautiful buildings. And these courts were more or less the back-to-back houses that we know about from places like Birmingham. The size of these rooms were unbelievable. I mean, they were around 8 foot square, so we're talking about 2.5 metres square to accommodate. They had no facilities whatsoever. The builders weren't interested in joining these buildings up to the sewerage system because that cost money, so we didn't bother about that. And in the centre of the court was, of course, the cesspit. And a lot of the poorer people kept pigs. So you had the piggeries, you had the cesspits, you had the small rooms, and it must have been absolutely horrendous.
In a bid to mitigate the health problems endured by the town's less privileged residents, Benjamin Satchwell set up the Leamington Charitable Institution, offering free baths to the poor, in 1806. From the 1820s, free healthcare was provided for those who couldn't afford to pay for it by Dr. Jeffson and others, first at the Charitable Institution's dispensary and later at Leamington's new hospital. Leamington Priors continued to grow rapidly. Its population tripled from just over 2,000 in 1821 to over 6,000 in 1831, and the number of visitors grew significantly as the town's reputation spread. In 1838, the townspeople successfully petitioned Queen Victoria for permission to change its name to Royal Leamington Spa.
The campaign was developed and led by somebody called Major Hawkes, who was the master of ceremonies at the Upper Assembly Room. And I think a lot of it arose out of the euphoria from the coronation of the Queen in 1838. And Mr. Hawkes seemed to enthuse everybody that it would be good for the town to become royal. And they did a rather obsequious petition to the Queen, which was delivered to the Prime Minister, and it was granted almost immediately.
From 8 o'clock, the number of spectators gradually increased, until at length several thousands were awaiting, with anxiety and interest, the appearance of those real promoters of the interests and the welfare of Leamington. At a few minutes before 10, signal rockets were fired at a little distance from the town, on which the band instantly struck up the appropriate tune of "See the Conquering Hero Comes." The deputation arrived at the town hall amidst one universal shout of enthusiastic joy. Major Hawkes begged most sincerely and cordially to unite his hearty congratulations with those of his fellow townsmen upon obtaining Her Majesty's gracious permission to designate that town the Royal Leamington Spa, a distinguished mark of regal favour which had not been bestowed upon any other place in the British dominions.
This was a great honour and should have marked a high point in the town's fortunes, but a financial crisis would bring the development of the new town to an abrupt halt. The Leamington Bank was one of several joint stock banks set up in the 1830s to help fund the development of the new town. Unlike in limited companies, the shareholders were individually liable for any debts incurred by the bank.
Most bankers, sensible bankers, were reluctant to lend to developers or speculators because there wasn't always a guarantee of getting your money back. But these joint stock banks were mainly directed by landowners themselves. They tended to be quite sympathetic towards developers and builders wishing to borrow money to develop the land. And so they did start to lend money to them. And in fact, the Leamington Bank, it's my understanding that they lent nearly 50% of their assets in this way. But unfortunately, in 1837, there was a bit of a blip in the economy. The joint stock banks, who had got permission from the government to borrow from the London banks to support them, had issued promissory notes for several thousand, £10,000 from these banks. The bank couldn't afford to pay back the London banks. The people who'd borrowed the money couldn't afford to pay it back either because they hadn't finished their development work and they couldn't sell their buildings. The London Bank were extremely unsympathetic and demanded that all the mortgages, all the title deeds and everything else was returned to them. And in fact, that's what happened.
The Leamington Bank went bust and took with it lots of builders, small craftsmen, all sorts of people. So building came to an end in Leamington for a while.
Another important factor in the decline of Leamington as a spa resort was the arrival of the railway in the 1840s.
The main line was driven through Old Town, which at that point was still a fairly prestigious and prosperous part of the town. But the railway really changed all of that. A bridge was put across the high street. The Cops Royal Hotel was demolished to make way for the railway, as was in fact a bathhouse on the other side of the road, Wiser's Baths, which was later known as Curtis's Baths. The whole of that part of Leamington was transformed. What had once been quite a desirable place to live now had as a regular feature what were large, noisy, stinking steam engines.
Society began to look elsewhere for healthy places to visit, and the railways made it easier and quicker than ever to travel to new locations.
The sort of places that became very popular as resort towns were places like Brighton, sea bathing, which had already quite popular. Really developed as a major rival to the inland spas, places like Leamington. It also meant, as the European continent developed its own railway system, it's brought the famous continental spa towns into reach as well.
By around 1880, all of the original bathhouses were either demolished or closed. Even the Grand Royal Pump Rooms fell into disrepair, and were only saved by public appeal led by the veteran Dr. Jeffson in 1861. Only traces of the original spa area now remain, but the Royal Pump Rooms and Gardens are still open to the public. The Regent Hotel recently reopened, and the names of the principal characters from this era in Leamington's history are still to be seen everywhere about the town.